With great love and respect from Hungary, from Budapest. I'm Máté Gesztesi, the host of today's sympathy demonstration. The purpose of our event today is to stand up for Israel. Although pandemic restrictions do not yet allow us to gather in person, it is a pleasure for us to see that thousands have gathered in the online space today to make our voices heard. In recent days, Palestinian terrorist organizations have launched a series of rocket attacks against Israeli urban areas for trumped-up reasons, following the violent and provocative actions the country which was attacked exercised its right of self-defense, with cautious retaliation targeting the headquarters and infrastructure of terrorist organizations. We have noticed that unfortunately a section of the international public has blamed Israel, labeling it a scapegoat, keeping silent about the real facts. We are here today to prove that Hungary, the Hungarian Christians, stand by Israel. Among the Jewish people, Shavuot has just begun, and during the holiday, most lock themselves in their homes and don't even use digital devices. They fall silent. However, the passionate hate and insults continue to fall on them, and this is the noise that is heard in the outside world today. That is why we Hungarian Christians consider it important to speak for them these days. Today's event was launched by Hit Radio, which is Faith Radio, the news magazine Hetek, and the Protest Young Youth Organization, to say boldly that Israel has a right to life. And the text of our statement reads as follows: We, the undersigned, hereby declare our full solidarity with Israel and recognize that every country has the right to protect its territories and its citizens. At the same time, we extend our sincere condolences to the family members of all innocent civilian victims who have lost their lives in the current conflict. This statement is available for signing at www.proisrael.hu, and by the start of our demonstration, we have received 6,503 signatures to support messages, and we thank you for that. We continue to welcome those who want to join the camp of people who stand up for Israel. And please welcome our first speaker, Greta Gulyás, a student of the National Civil Service University and one of the editors of Faith Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank all of you who have accepted the invitation of Faith Radio, Hetek, and Protest Youth Organization to participate in today's event to express our solidarity in defense of Israel. As a Christian, as a young person, and as a Hungarian citizen who loves her country, I consider it very important and necessary to stand up and speak up in defense of Israel in the current Israeli conflict. If we look at the majority of international news reports, social media posts, and world public discourse, we can note that, with regret, that it is not typical, and let us say it's not very recommendable, to openly vote in favor of the Jewish state. We are here today, however, to make a courageous stand for Israel's right to exist. The Jewish nation has been, and Jewish people has been attacked under many times throughout history. Usually they have been held responsible for the world's current calamities, whether it was the plague of the Middle Ages or the wars of the 20th century. Current accusations against Israel include defining it as racist, apartheid state that tramples human rights underfoot. The fact is that Israel is the only democratic state in the Middle East. Its Arab inhabitants are treated as equal citizens with the Jewish ones. The principle declared in the 1948 Declaration of Independence. We call upon the Arab inhabitants of the State of Israel to preserve peace and participate in the building of the state as full and equal citizens. Nothing demonstrates this desire for peaceful coexistence better than the fact that Israel is the only modern state to have given back key areas for its own defense in the interest of peace, and even to have relinquished control of its holiest religious site, the Temple Mount, in order to curtail its own free exercise of religion. But if the Jewish people are open to peaceful coexistence, why shouldn't the Palestinians also establish a free state? First of all, because there is no such ethnicity. Arabs living in Israel call themselves Palestinians. Indeed, the name Palestinian is a perfect way of creating sympathy and exploiting human compassion for an oppressed, forgotten ethnic minority. Secondly, the Arab population living in Israel has been offered the possibility to establishing a state in the region on 5 occasions, but has been rejected on all 5. Let us admit it is extremely difficult to reach an agreement with an organization whose aim is to expel the Jews from the Middle East and to crush the State of Israel. This is what Hamas, which is undoubtedly a terrorist organization, and perhaps the organization with the greatest influence on the Arab inhabitants, is trying to do at all costs. Under the 1947 United Nations Declaration, international law supported the creation of a Jewish and an Arab state of Palestine. The Arab population rejected the draft while the Jewish accepted it, and the State of Israel was proclaimed on the 14th of May, 1948. The Arab world responded by attacking a newly formed state the next day with the participation of 5 countries. As the formerly Hitler-friendly chief mufti of Jerusalem said, "What the United Nations writes in ink, we will erase with blood." Every state has the right to self-defense if it's the victim of armed aggression. It has the right to defend its citizens and its borders according to international law. Israel is a fully fledged free state. Its inhabitants suffer daily atrocities at the hands of terrorist organizations. Thanks to their advanced military technology, they defuse most of the missiles that hit, but the damage to civilians and settlements is still considerable. Why is the security of the Jewish state is important to Europe? Israel has gained experience from the constant presence of terrorism and is working to develop self-defense mechanisms that Western societies should be prepared for. It is in our common interest as a democratic states to support other democratic states and to join forces in the fight against the threat of terrorism that we face. Israel's commitment to building and not tearing down is demonstrated by the fact that where 100 years ago there were only sand hills, today one of the world's high-tech centers, Tel Aviv, is located. Furthermore, as a Hungarian citizen, I consider it very important to stand up for the right to life and security of my fellow Hungarians who settled in the State of Israel. I would like to also express my sympathy to the relatives of the innocent victims, to the helpless civilians who spend their days in fear because of the rocket attacks and other threats. I express my solidarity with the soldiers who are fighting heroically for the country, with particular sensitivity to young boys and girls of my age who cannot enjoy the fullness of their youth because they may not live to see tomorrow. I also sympathize with the innocent Arab victims of terror whose endangerment and murder are Hamas' way of trying to gain public empathy. I wish that both Israel and the Arab population who desire peace may be freed from the grip of terror and live in peace and tranquility. I wish God's abundant blessing on Israel.
Support messages are constantly coming into www.proisrael.hu, and I'll read some of them now. Dear Israelis, hold on like the Spartan soldiers of the Budapest garrison in the Yom Kippur War, and then you will win. If everything is against you, there is still hope. You yourself, and then you have already won, hoping that the victorious peace can come from the position of the Budapest garrison as well as from the present operation. Many people in Hungary are with you. You are role models. Thinking of you, János from Budapest. Another comment. Consider it absolutely legitimate and even heroic that the state of Israel does not run cowardly away from the attacks by Palestinians, does not let the Jewish people and the Eretz down, but seeks to protect its citizens and retaliate against the atrocities that are happening. This was from Pap Gedeon Vasile, Nagykároly, Carei, Romania. Another letter. In these difficult times, I wish you faith, strength, and perseverance. I believe that the God of Israel is mighty and still fearfully loves his people. We are by your side and we pray for you. May there be peace in Israel. J. Lydia from Székesfehérvár. Defending the country is the right and duty of every nation. May the blessing and protection of the Lord be in Israel. Regards, Sándor Krieger from Salgótarján. And finally, I'm convinced that Israel has a right to self-defense, to protect its citizens and at the same time to prevent acts of terrorism. I respect the warning messages and the knocking warning missiles that are being sent to protect civilians. Szabolcs Tóth from Karcag. And we could go on reading for a long time with thousands of encouragements. Incidentally, these messages of support will now be handed over in person by the organizers to the ambassador of the State of Israel in Hungary on Thursday. And in addition to the messages of support, the Israeli flag was hoisted as a symbol of solidarity in several Hungarian towns, including Eger, Gödöllő, Kecskemét, Balatonfüred, Székesfehérvár, Karcag, Veszprém, Tatabánya, Cegléd, Nyíregyháza, Szolnok, Bicske, and Gyöngyös. And now please welcome our next speaker, Dr. Anna Petrasovic, representative of the foundation Keren Helyesod Hungária.
I would like to greet you with deep appreciation, love and respect. I am Anna Petrasovic, member of the Board of Trustees of the Keren Helyesod Hungária Foundation, responsible for special affairs and also organizer of the women's movement. Keren Helyesod is the official fundraising organization of the State of Israel and has had a special status since 1956. We have also been working here in Hungary for many years, and I'm honored to be here in the radio of Faith Church, as I have experienced countless times in my work that you can always, at all times, be counted on in everything. Today we celebrate Shavuot. Of course, this year is different, as people in Israel are angry, frustrated, upset because something went very wrong. Hamas is doing what it has been doing countless times before. You could almost say that Israelis have gotten used to it, if you can get used to bad things. Thousands of rockets are being fired all over the country, and the new element is that they are not only bringing chaos in the south, but they are also hitting Jerusalem and Tel Aviv on a regular basis. People are looking for reasons, and many people say that perhaps one of the subjective reasons behind this chaos is that this year Jerusalem Day and the end of Ramadan celebrations coincided, and perhaps that has inflamed emotions on our side. On the Arab side, and perhaps this is why happened what has happened. And also, there's a new factor that we do not only have an external enemy in Israel, but unfortunately the internal problems of society have also become more and more acute. Sad, very sad, as we have reports of lynchings in many towns and Arabs and Israeli youths fighting. But what can we do from here, from our prosperous societies, from our armchairs? Of course, we can do a lot, first and foremost spiritually, through prayer, through compassion, and whoever and however can obviously contribute financially to these campaigns. We are very, very grateful for all the cooperation and all the success we have achieved with you so far, with Faith Church, spiritually in terms of commitment to Israel and in all other aspects. Thank you very much. May God bless you. And we hope that the cooperation between Christians and Jews will find new and newer ways to improve the world. Thank you very much for listening.
Köszönöm szépen, hogy meghallgattatok.
I would like to quote a very important biblical truth that whoever blesses you is blessed, which God promised Abraham and he promised to Israel. And I think that Israel's right to self-defense must be recognized and upheld to a great extent against all subversive propaganda, against anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic propaganda. And by the way, there are radio listeners from Israel, also from areas where there are very difficult moments right now, tuned in to our current broadcast. What is your message to them? On the one hand, I want them to feel that we are with them, in spirit and soul. My wife and I are following the events closely. We're constantly praying for Jerusalem, for our friends who live there. And they're not alone. They're not left behind. I believe Israel has many friends, and I'm convinced that hundreds of millions, especially Christians, sympathize with Israel and pay attention to them as to their own nation. As I see it, at least the main biblical strand of Christianity is increasingly moving in a direction that is getting closer and closer to the Jewish people. And I can say the same thing about a significant portion of the Israeli population, that they are increasingly recognizing that they have many friends around the world who love them and pray in these moments that they may be surrounded by God's blessing, grace, and protection. And I'm quite sure that there will be an opportunity again for very cheerful, hopeful pilgrims to visit Israel and comfort the people who live there in this way. These were the words of Sándor Németh, the senior pastor of Faith Church, speaking out in support of Israel in an interview with Faith Radio last week. This interview inspired the organizers to organize today's sympathy demonstration. I'd like to share more messages of encouragement we received for today's sympathy demonstration. Terror is unacceptable for any cause. I am convinced that the Jewish people have the right to live in the land of their ancestors, in their own state, in peace, undisturbed, and to defend themselves against the violence motivated by irrational hatred. Tamás Mikec from Gödöllő. I personally visited all of Israel in December 2006. I personally experienced the kindness, love, hospitality of the people. I saw them trying to get from 1 to 2. They worked a lot every day. I saw how much they love their children and how cohesive families are. So Israel is a good example before us in all respects. I wish peace to Jerusalem and to all of Israel. Be as hard and fair as always. Gábor Kovács from Veszprém. Israel has a right to live and is largely responsible for peace in the whole region, whether the countries of the world recognize it or not. The Jewish people and their friends just want to live in peace in the Holy Land and everywhere in the world. No one will ever be able to prevent this. Israel has a right to self-defense and will do everything, always, to make sure no one harms their people. Israel lives and will always live. Amen. Thank you, Faith Church, for standing up for Israel and for the Jewish people, as always. Gábor Gordon, Chairman of the Board of the March of Life Foundation. Israel has the right to protect its citizens from the missiles and attacks of the Hamas terrorist organization. It is our moral duty as Christians to stand up for our Jewish friends. Thank you, the organizers, for giving us this opportunity. May God protect Israel. Sándor Tárkányi from Sopron. We love Israel, God's chosen people. If the Lord is with you, who can be against you? Lajos Sarka and his family from Havies. And now I call on the next speaker of our today's sympathy demonstration, Dr. István László Mészáros, attorney, former vice chairman of the Hungarian Parliament's Human Rights Committee, and deputy rector of St. Paul's Academy. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome. With today's demonstration, we're firmly in favor of Israel's right to self-defense, its right to exist in peace and security. We express our solidarity with the innocent Israeli and Arab victims of the armed violence provoked and perpetrated by Hamas. We extend our condolences to the relatives of the innocent victims. I stand before you as a Christian and as a Hungarian, considering it my moral duty to speak. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is an old but true saying that you can learn about the tree from its fruit. The launch of the devastating missile attacks, the firing of thousands of missiles at Israeli towns by Islamist Hamas, which has also been designated as a terrorist organization by the European Union, speaks for itself. It eliminates the need for any further investigation. Indiscriminate armed attacks and destruction against the lives and property of innocent civilians is a barbaric war crime. There can be no explanation for it in any social, political, or legal debate. This brutal series of actions in itself indicates that jihadist death cults like Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, are only looking for an opportunity to operate their death factories. In addition, the Arab population of Gaza is being used as a human shield for this. This in itself is a war crime. They are firing from the cover of civilian Arab buildings and institutions in hope that Israeli self-defense responses hit Arab civilians, so that Israel can be accused by pointing to the victims in front of the whole world. So Hamas has committed and is committing a double war crime. On the one hand, it is threatening the lives of innocent Israeli civilians, and on the other hand, the lives of its own people. It is also appalling to think about the number of casualties there would be due to the thousands of missiles fired at Israel today, were it not for the expensive Iron Dome system that protects Israeli airspace. But it is already abnormal and in itself a testament against the enemies of Israel that in the 21st century, an Iron Dome and hundreds of kilometers of a defensive wall are needed for a people to feel relatively safe, even in peacetime. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Hamas has never concealed its goal of destroying Israel. It has openly proclaimed this in its founding charter and also proclaims it in its current charter. The coat of arms of Hamas also depicts the entire territory of Israel as a Muslim Arab state. They consider the land of Israel, which the former Roman conquerors renamed Palestine out of revenge, to be the property of Allah, and Hamas considers Israel to be an integral part of the Ummah, the unified global Muslim community. So, so-called liberation from non-Muslim rule is a duty given by Allah to all true Muslims. As a result, Hamas today does not recognize the statehood of Israel, nor even the Oslo Accords establishing Israeli Arab autonomy. And they consider not only Israeli Jews as enemies, but also any Arab living there, a heretic, who is willing to accept the existence of the Jewish state and to think about coexisting in peace. It is a political blindness to think that this diabolical policy, fueled by religious fanaticism, could be suppressed by any territorial settlement or appeased. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel, on the other hand, also demonstrated its commitment to peaceful coexistence by withdrawing unilaterally from the Gaza Strip back in 2005. It handed over the entire territory there to the Palestinian Authority, and the PA had an excellent opportunity for peaceful, constructive work to prove to the world how they would use the freedom thus created. However, it is typical that the 2006 Palestinian Authority elections were won by Hamas, and then, soon after, with bloody armed violence in the Gaza Strip, claiming the deaths of many, they seized full power from their local Arab rivals. No new autonomous elections have taken place since then, and Hamas is the lord of life and death in the Gaza Strip. It has turned the area into a terrorist base with Iranian backing, and the billions of dollars received from international organizations in support of the PA are mostly used to build terrorist infrastructure, rather than improving and normalizing the living conditions of Arab youth and families. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel and the peace-loving Arab people and nations are not enemies of each other. Their enemy is common, Islamist jihadism that oppresses them all. And Islamist jihadism, political Islam, which at the opening of this millennium kicked the door on the entire civilized world by tearing down the Twin Towers of New York, which turned Syria and Iraq into hell on earth, and which Iran has been using for decades to radicalize the entire Muslim world. Islamist jihadism, empowering terrorists to slash people's throats in European countries that receive migrants, shooting at innocent passers-by, driving cars into crowds, blowing up nightclubs, and desecrating Christian churches, ignoring the laws of host societies. Islamist jihadism is the common enemy, the essence of which is intimidation, terror, and war, until it brings its environment under its control, to shape it into its own image. It is a welcome development in the Arab countries that they have also begun to recognize this, and as evidenced by the Abraham Accords, have begun to normalize their relations with Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel is at the forefront of the fight against Islamist jihadism. We have a common Judeo-Christian culture, and Israel is the only representative of democracy in the Middle East. It is beyond dispute that it deserves all our support. As it protects our world, it also fights our struggle. A strong Israel capable of defending itself is also in the security interest of Europe. This is because Israel is not only a sovereign state entitled to protect its territorial integrity and population, but also the bastion of the free world in the Middle East. Here in Europe, it is also our own well-conceived interest to talk about this directly, loudly, and clearly, without beating around the bush. Loud and clear, because we're living in a time here in the European Union when it has become a trend to confuse the cause with the effect, to blame the real victims. For example, blaming people exercising their free speech instead of the throat slashers, stigmatizing those who cling to their own culture, their own national identity, their national borders, against those who disregard their borders, culture, and laws. That is why it is an encouraging and welcome development that the leaders of several European countries have stood up for Israel's right to self-defense. We have seen this, and we want more people to follow suit. It is a special pleasure for us Hungarians that the Hungarian government was among the first to do so. And this is also what we are doing here right now. We're also pleased that our government has long been bold and consistent in advocating for Israel's rights in international forums. We trust this will continue. From here, we send our message from Budapest to the people of Israel, and along with them to all the peace-loving Arabs there, that you are not alone. We are with you. We support you. We are with you. God bless and protect you there, all of you, and give peace in Israel and the whole region. Thank you, and see you soon.
Köszönjük szépen dr. Mészáros István szavait.
Thank you very much, Dr. István Mészáros. I'm very
újabb
pleased to announce the
felszólalóját,
next speaker of our demonstration, His Excellency Yakov Handelsman, Ambassador of the State of Israel to Hungary, who sent us his video message before the holiday. Please welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, member of the Faith Church of Hungary, duly gazetted. We would like to take this opportunity and sincerely thank you, Mr. Nemet Sándor, and all the members of the Faith Church for continually standing up and supporting Israel through your regular pilgrimages and educational trips to the Holy Land, State of Israel, organized by your church. Moreover, we would like to show our gratitude to the Faith Church for its long-maintained ties with Israel and Hungarian Jewry throughout the past decades, and for also raising worship services and conferences against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in Hungary and elsewhere. Once again, we sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, for the strengthening of relationship with Hungarian Jews, and for taking a stand by the independent Jewish state during this period. Your current solidarity campaign proves again that you are materializing the proverb, "A friend in need is a friend indeed." Thank you very much and happy Pentecost.
Rendezvényünk végéhez közeledve szeretnénk köszönetet mondani minden
Towards
támogatónknak.
the end of our event, we would like to thank all of our supporters for their open and courageous stand. I think that today we succeeded in proving that Israel can count on Hungary. Israel can count on the Hungarian people. We hope that the support will not end with today's online event. We will be preparing more and more programs in the coming days, and we're still waiting for supporting signatures and messages on www.proisrael.hu. And we encourage all of us to pray for Israel, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. The joint demonstration of Faith Radio, the news magazine Hetek, and Protest Youth Organization will be concluded today by performer Tamás Bajor, who will present his own work. Thank you for being with us, all of you. May God bless Israel. Hello, greetings with great love to all of you who have gathered today, participants of the online demonstration. I'll read a single verse from the Torah. You shall not follow the crowd in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute, so as to join together with a crowd in order to pervert justice. In the international arena, in communication, people, opinion leaders are trying to surpass each other in the condemnation of Israel. This has already become a rupture test of ethical opinion forming, and opinion makers fail one after the other. But they don't take the trouble to travel to Israel and talk to the man and the woman on the street, to smell the air and assess what is there, because then they would see that all Israelis want peace. I've done this more than once, and it's a personal testimony on my part. And now I will recite my poem about the wandering Jew and the Jewish planet. And this was written earlier, and there is a line which expresses a priority for Jerusalem as opposed to Tel Aviv, not to be misunderstood. In this online demonstration, of course, we're also thinking about the people in Tel Aviv and all of Israel. So the wandering Jew and the Jewish planet.
Megette a kamut Ádám csutkára, por lett és hamu, így indult útjára. Az alma mátertől a kígyó rágalmát emésztés 6000 éve rágalmát. Így történt, hogy Káin meggyűlölte Ábelt, nem találva meg azt a szívbéli kábelt. És azokban is kihunyt a belső halogén, kik röhögtek Noén, pedig nem is volt poén. Aztán bement a Kám, és kijött, hogy Kém. Maradt a Jáfet, és maradt a Sém. Mert alantasám, a felettesén, könnyen áll bosszút a felettesén. És mikor Ábrahám már csillagokat látott, akkor akkor adta fel az áldást rám és rátok. Nevetett sára a sokaság látására, mert még semminek nem volt ott áfás ára. Az áldáshoz ivott Izsák egy áldomást. Sokan innen vezetik le a kizsákmányolást. Hát így indult el a nagy történelem, és itt landolt a sárban a csúf RTL-en. Lencse végre kapta, amikor megjött Kábán, a tesót Jákob, aztán megállt a lábán. Majd várták, a pusztító meddig tombol, és Mózessel jöhettek ki Egyiptomból. 2 tenger közt oldalról nézték a halakat, Jerikóban rekordot döntöttek, falakat. Dávid legyőzte azt a Pimasz óriást, de sajnos megölte az igaz Úriást. A fia ott volt fejben, hiszen ő Salamon, ma is ütnek szavai üzenő falamon. Lesz a bolygó zsidónak egy zsidó bolygó, egy szívforrósító nap, mondd mikortól jó. Hol az egész világ kicsit izraeli, és az árnyékot a fény majd visszaveri. Lesz a bolygó zsidónak egy zsidó bolygó, egy szívforrósító nap, mondd mikortól jó. Hol az abszolút veri azt, ami relatív, ahol Jeruzsálem a menő, és nem Tel Aviv. Ezékiel meg csak falta a könyveket. A tekercsből hangszólt, tekerts föl, s lehelt. Ettől az izmok, a csontok, az inak nem maradhattak inaktívak. Így született újra ez a picurka földrész, bár alig találod, ha a Google-ra fölmész, de mégis ez itt ugye a föld köldöke. Az Úr fontolja megint, követett küldöke. És ha tartani nem is tudja sok jogszabályát, csak nyugodjon rajta a nép, és szokja báját. Nézd újra Izraelt, hol Jézus a vízre állt, majd kibucnyig túrta a kócos kis szocre állt. De hova tűnt a hősök sártaposása? A keresőmotor az új startupotása. Itt nem esett messze az elme a fejétől, az ígéret földje a méze tejétől, de baklavát, humuszt raknak arab tálba, szirénák hangjánál, szájuk harabdálva. A lesétált kövekre kiteszik sagált, közben elhallgatva a müezin sakált, és hogy katonának a grün vagy a kón ment el, nem tudhatja az, ki csak kívülről kommentel. Üvölt egy orosz lány, szakasztott mása. Szefárd lesz a lányból, akárki meglássa. Nem új keletű ő, hanem régi keleti, és a kényszerű jelmezt majd végül is leveti. Mert ahol a régészklub nem messzi ás, ott fog majd lépni a nagy messiás. És nem marad majd száraz a sivatag homok, se a nyomok, se a konok, neokonok, mert érzik, nem olyan ma, sem a rím, se a dal, de ha jön ő, a kis mea se a rím lehasal. Lesz a bolygó zsidónak egy zsidó bolygó, egy szívforrósító nap, mondd mikortól jó. Hol az egész világ kicsit izraeli, és az árnyékot a fény majd visszaveri. Lesz a bolygó zsidónak egy zsidó bolygó, egy szívforrósító nap, mondd mikortól jó. Hol az abszolút veri azt, ami relatív, ahol Jeruzsálem a menő, és nem Tel Aviv. Köszönöm szépen, hogy meghallgattatok.